Welcome back to our next session of addictions class on video. We're going to do our 5 deep breaths, and then today our topic is what's your story? How what we tell ourselves and what we've been told affects our identity, behavior, and meaning. So first, our 5 deep breaths. As you can tell, I'm making more than one video in a day because I'm wearing the same clothes, so I get to do 5 deep breaths several times a day, and I haven't even died yet, so there's a hint for you all. So remember, long, deep, slow breaths, and try to get your mind just to loosely let things float by while you're doing this, so you don't get caught up in that whole, hamster on the wheel or monkey mind or whatever you want to call it. So nice deep breath in. Hold at the top. Really get those lungs expanded. Slowly out. Second one in. And out. Again, at the bottom, your lungs are empty, and that gives you a chance to take a really nice breath in on the third one in. And out. And in. Out. And our last one, just let any distractions or sounds just float by. In. And out. So I thought I would start this with some ideas by a guy named Viktor Frankl. And if you guys know, if you guys have been to my classes in person, if you haven't, that's okay, welcome. There's new people in the jail who've never gotten to come to groups live. Please come to groups back when we're all getting together, because we share with each other. You guys have a lot of great questions, great stories, things that hit you certain ways. So it really helps to have this in person. And also sometimes to challenge you to step outside yourself, to look at things differently, and not just try to be like, Mr. Suave and, do the group well or whatever, but actually get to some real stuff. So one of my favorite books, though, is called Man's Search for Meaning. And it's by a guy named Viktor Frankl, who was he was studying, the mind and psychology and psychiatry when the Nazis took over in Germany. And he was, in his 30s, had a pregnant wife, stayed in Germany because of his parents who were infirm, but basically ended up losing his entire family. The wife, the unborn baby, the parents, everybody in the Holocaust, and really was in terrible shape himself at the end. He went in there, though, with a body of work called logotherapy, and what he talks about is this idea that we are bigger than what happens to us. We are bigger than our circumstances, and that really we search for meaning, and it's the meaning we make of things, so no matter what comes our way. And I think sometimes it's really easy if you get some people saying, oh, there's some divine plan to all this, or there's some meaning, or it sounds different if it's someone who's never suffered anything big, breaking a nail is a big deal or whatever. That's not me, obviously, because I don't do the nail thing. But it's different coming from someone who you're like, wow, because people talk about, well, jail's no fun, and boy, I could get injured or killed in here, but the rate of getting killed in jail and prisons are very, very low versus concentration camps, which were almost, I think it was 96%. I'll have to look it up again, but of people who entered, perished. So, I mean, your odds were much more toward the die side than the live side. And still he came out with this positive attitude. He also, before he died, he met with a woman whose books I have in my lending library. When I get back in there, hopefully they're still safely getting passed around the pod during this quarantine time, called The Choice by Edith Ava Agar. And unlike him, she was taken into the camps when she was like 17 years old. She's in her 90s now. She wrote this book when she was 93. I think she's 94 or maybe almost 95 now. But she talks about that same idea, that it's the choice of how we do all this. Now, she also talks about trying to just forget the trauma for a long time. And that really didn't work for her very well in her life. So she talks about this idea of, you know, having to actually go there and really know what it is. So that's what we're digging into today. Now, Viktor Frankl's ideas can be summarized in 3 points, and I want you to think about this as we talk about what's your story. Our primary motivation is our will to find meaning in life. Human beings are meaning makers. It's what we do. 2, meaning can be found in any circumstances when we give ourselves over to something greater than ourselves, whether it is a cause or another person, or for some people that's spirituality, whatever that is. But it's about more than just me. We've talked about this in several videos, but keep remembering, human beings are hardwired for connection. We want connection, and we need some independence and autonomy. So we need to be individuals in connection. This is a thing called interdependence. And, you know, this whole dependence word in the U.S. has gotten a really bad rap. Dependence, codependence, it's kind of like needy and clingy. But interdependence is actually the natural state of human beings. I'm supposed to need people. You're supposed to need people. That's our bonding. Now, we're not supposed to lose ourselves in those other people. And we'll talk, you know, we've talked about boundaries, and we'll talk about that again. So we do need to have boundaries and assertive communication and all of those things. But it's that interdependence. And the other thing is, it's not just about what you say no to. One of the dumbest things ever, and I thought it then and I said it then, I've you know, this has not been a change of heart at all. When they came out with this campaign, now some of you will be too young to remember, but they had this campaign about drugs, and it was just say no. And I remember at the time going like, wow, we spent a lot of money on this, and we're going to spend a lot of time on this. Human beings are not meant to just say no. It's not enough just to say no to something. We have to also say, what am I saying yes to? So it's not just I'm saying no to addictions. It has to be, if I'm going to not use these addictions, what's my yes? What am I moving toward? What's my meaning that I really want to get that these addictions actually prevent me from getting? So that's that sense of purpose, right? That we talk about, your dreams, your goals, your purpose. Because my purpose in doing these videos and doing the classes, people often think, oh, it's to, you know, get us all sober or to keep us off of drugs or alcohol. I don't have any control over that. That's up to you. My goal is to have you see, what are my choices? That's why I like the title of Edith Ava Agar's book. I want you to see, what choices do I have? What are my dreams? What are my goals? What do I want to achieve for me, for my family, for my kids? And how am I going to do that? So, that meaning piece. And finally, 3, he said, we always have the freedom to find meaning, even in the face of unchangeable suffering. He could not change the camps. He could not change the Nazi occupation. He could not change the fact that his family and many of his fellow country people were being put to death. But he could find meaning in it. And one of the quotes I like, it is not freedom from conditions, but it is freedom to take a stand toward the conditions. So remember those things as we're talking about your story. Now, why do we have to talk about your story? Because when we talk about your story, what's going to come up? Oh, your childhood. You go like, oh my God, Darla's a therapist, because I'm a therapist and a registered nurse. There's that therapy part, you know, what was your childhood like? Childhood influences us in huge ways. I mean, those are our first times when we learn about relationships, when we're either accepted as this, you know, valuable, worthy, lovable, important little being, and we're nurtured in that, or we're not. All kinds of things happen in childhood which really lay down a bunch of imprints on us, a bunch of blueprints inside that say this is how life goes. This is how relationships go. So you're handed a script. You know, when you're born, you're given a script, and you're not responsible for that script, right? It can be whether you were born male or female, whether you were single or you were a twin or you were a triplet, right? Whether you were born a preemie or you were born, you know, a big bouncing baby, city or country, what racial group you were born into, what socioeconomic group you were born into, what religious group, what community was around you, all of these kinds of things. That script was handed to you. What was going on in your family at the time? Were you the first? Were you the 15th? You know, what's that one family? You know, were you the 19th kid in the family? Whatever it is. Where did you fit in all these things? So you were handed a script with characters and dramas and comedies and all kinds of influences and, you know, antagonists and protagonists, you know, people, you know, coming in and out of the stage. You're not responsible for the script you were handed. And then our script often does a few things for us. It shapes our identity. Because maybe we're given a certain role in this script. And we start to believe that that role is who we are. So maybe your role was the first kid. Maybe you were what we call the hero child. We'll do this more in families too. But maybe you were that hero kid. You're the first kid. You're supposed to, you know, be the biggest, the strongest, the brightest, the smartest, you know, the responsible one. You're the one that the parents are like, oh, you know, my baby's so good and they make me look good, or whatever the deal is. So you might be that. You might be some people in here, and this is often one that people kind of associate with. What if your role, your assigned role in this whole thing was the black sheep of the family? That role carries certain responsibilities with it, right? Certain ways you behave, certain things you do, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of things that you're handed, even what language you speak. You know, if you're born in China, you would be speaking Chinese. If you're born in the U.S., you're going to speak English. And that's not because your brain can't learn Chinese. Babies can learn any language, but they learn what they're around. And after a while, it just sounds natural, right? If you're a Chinese baby, Chinese sounds natural. When we hear Chinese, we can't tell the difference between lots of those sounds, right? Same thing for people learning English or whatever. So that's that thing. Childhood is important. Now, it's not what we don't want you doing. I'm not saying I want you to sit and examine your childhood, you know, for every little detail. This is not the Woody Allen on the couch, you know, a million years of therapy and he's still screwed up, right? No, it's not about that. And another thing that people often think is, am I just blaming other people? There's a difference between blame and explanation. An explanation says, wow, if I look at this story, I can figure out some of why I am the way I am, some of why I've become the way I've become. And I can also examine these stories from a different vantage point. I'm not a helpless little kid anymore who's stuck in this story. I can look at this whole thing and decide what I'm going to do with it, right? So you're in a whole different position in terms of the power to change the story. And that's what we're talking about. So you do need to look at your childhood enough to know what it is I'm dealing with. And then that mature self, we did a video on how to grow yourself up, that mature self then looks through and figures out, what am I going to do with the script I was handed? So we'll talk about all that. So humans are meaning makers. We learn through stories. When you think about it, how are kids taught a lot of things? Through stories. You know, story time. They read stories. They identify with the characters. Before the written word, people would pass down the history, you know, of their culture through stories. So around the world, we learn things through stories. Religions use stories. Spiritual things, philosophies use stories. Cultures have stories, right? Our stories, you know, they've now said it's not true or whatever, but, you know, George Washington and chopping down the cherry tree, I cannot tell a lie. Abe Lincoln, you know, walking to school in Kentucky. I mean, we have certain stories too, culturally, that support certain things. like some cultures, their stories focus on cooperation and how we get things done together. Often in our culture, we like stories that are like pull yourself up by the bootstrap stories, right? So stories really do develop our sense of who we are in relationship to other people and our culture, and it tells us a lot about ourselves. Now, sometimes it doesn't actually reflect who we are. The story reflects who we are by nature of our position in a culture. So we often make up stories about, let's use gender as an example, right? Male and female. So we often make up stories that men are supposed to fit into or women are supposed to fit into, when in fact human beings have all these qualities that make us full human beings. So there are a lot more similarities between men and women in all their, all their elements than there are differences. But we often focus on the differences, and sometimes we lock people into a story. So we might say, one of the stories has been that, big boys don't cry, real men don't cry, real men don't like pink, right? There's all these things about what men should do or shouldn't do, instead of saying, hey, some men might like pink, some men will hate pink, but you know what? The same is true for women. Not all women love pink, right? With women, what do we often say? Like, there's this myth, and I'll get to that one in a little bit. Women love to shop. Well, I'm living proof. Women do not love to shop. I always joke that I'm a hunter when it comes to going into a store, which is really working for me during this whole pandemic, because they say, get in and get out quick. That's how I always look at it. I make a list, I scope it out, I spot it, I kill it, I bag it, I take it home, right? I'm a hunter. But in the get it done quick hunting phase, I'm not a stroller when I come to shop, right? And I don't do it for enjoyment. I do it for what I need at the time. So, and there was one thing when there's a book called, and people liked it because it pointed out some things that kind of come up sometimes, especially raised in a culture where we're told women and men are so different. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. And the guy, I remember him saying on one of his videos, this was probably 20 years ago now, but he was just like, women should, you need to nurture, that part of you, that shopping gene or whatever. And I'm thinking, what? This is crazy. Don't fit me into a role that I'm not fitting in. So again, but in his story, the story he was making up about men and women being from different planets, and he was trying, in some ways to bridge that gap, that if we understand each other, we'll get along better. There's a difference between trying to understand that gap and trying to promote it. And I think sometimes he got into promoting it. Like, let's promote all women love to shop, and let's promote all the poor men are standing there holding the bags, or whatever the deal was. So we explain our world and our reality to each other by our stories. And kids love stories because they can put themselves in different parts, right? So kids can be the dog. I gotta check my timer. Kids can be the dog in a story, the cat in a story, the hero, all these kinds of things. But that's also how we communicate. Now, sometimes as you're thinking about what stories you're telling people and you're telling yourselves, then ask yourself, am I really getting across my reality through the story, or am I telling a story to build up some image that I've been handed that's not really me? So if you've been the hardcore, but Darla, I'm a drug addict. It's what I do. This is me. It's my identity. If you don't find a new story, it's going to be really hard to stay in recovery if that's your goal, right? So sometimes you have to go, wow, I can't keep telling these stories that build up my false self if my real self wants to do it differently. We assign meanings to events, past, present, and future, and this affects our past, present, and future. The meaning we assign to what happened to us matters. The meaning we're assigning as things are going on right now matters. And it also creates our future. So that's part to consider too. Now, our brain also connects things in neural pathways. And the one that I want you to pay attention to as you're looking at your childhood is negative neural pathways. What this means is when one negative thing comes up, your brain kind of connects it to the next negative and the next negative and the next negative and the next negative. And this is why sometimes when you get into a fight, you can remember everything that person's ever done to you back to 1955. And I wasn't even born in 1955, right? But it's just like it connects all these negative things and it pulls them all in rather than staying focused on what's going on right now. So while you don't control the script you were handed, you do need to look at what's going on in your script through adult eyes. Because when you're looking through adult eyes, you say, oh, this is why I am the way I am now. This is how I've become who I am. This is why some of my reactions and behaviors happen because of this part of the story. And then through those adult eyes, you can say, how do I want to edit, change, rewrite, redo, update my story? And a lot of times what that means is you're going to have to get other people on your team, right? Even writing teams, Saturday Night Live, they have a team of writers who write those things that then, like, people at the, the news desk on SNL or whatever come out and say, but they're teams of writers. So you get other people. So you may need to have people help you rewrite your story. That's why groups can be important, therapy can be important, some kind of bigger spiritual piece can be important, because those people help you rewrite your stories. And it says, and there might be some characters you want to write out of your story, right? These people I don't want to be center stage with me. They're going to be more peripheral. Some people that are on the outside, you might want to bring them closer to you on the stage. So this puts you in the role of, now I'm writing this story. Now I can't control everything in it. I can't control every person and every character, but I can certainly invite some things in, and I can control my reactions, my responses, right? So writing that new story. And it's not so much the events that shape us, it's the meaning we assign to those events that writes our story in the long run. So we're often told who we are and where we belong based on our stories. Then we repeat the story, and if we do it enough, it feels like, but Darla, that's who I am. And we'll often find ourselves saying this to our loved ones in a fight. Well, you know what? That's just too bad, because that's how I am. That's who I am. If you don't like it, leave, right? When in fact, maybe that's who you've been. Is it who you want to stay? Is it who you want to become? So keep asking that, because I've got 4 different examples. So one of the ways that we get caught up in believing a story as the unshakable, rewritable truth is, I'm a person, or she is a person who is, or he, or I'm not, or he's not a person who, whatever, fill in the blank. So, for example, I'm good at sports, so don't expect to see me reading a book, right? That's the dumb jock script that some people have, okay? Now, could people be both good at sports and reading a book? Yeah, but we may have sold people short. Or, oh, she's gorgeous, but she's an airhead. Some gorgeous people are not airheads, and some airheads are not gorgeous, right? So we have these stories. The other way, and it might be like, now some people would say, well, he's learned everything from books, so he's got no common sense. Some people have both. They've learned it from the books and they have common sense. Some people haven't done any book learning and they don't have any common sense. There's all kinds of combinations. Or I hear this one, hey, I just come from the school of hard knocks, or I come from the streets. That's how I learn things, right? And people think, therefore, I can't learn through other methods. And one thing I've really appreciated about when I started the lending library a couple of years ago is you guys are reading like amazing books in here. You are, and you get them. People say to me like, you're buying those books for people at the jail. And I think, again, is that a myth in a story that people are making up for you? Inmates don't read. Inmates don't think. Inmates aren't that smart. And it's like, wow. I try to educate people on, well, think about who people are and then put those in jail, and that's who inmates are, right? Because there's inmates at all levels of things. Second one is, I'm blank, and therefore blank should happen, or I'm blank, so I should fill in the blank. So I'll give you a couple of examples. But what I want you to do is be thinking about for yourself. What do you say where you have those kinds of things? So, for instance, and I have heard people say this, well, I'm Italian, so I'm loud and I have a quick temper, right? Of course I'm loud, I'm Italian. Is every Italian loud, right? Now, there might be a lot of them who are, but again, is every Italian loud? And does that mean you have to be loud all the time? And does that mean you get off the hook for having a temper? Even Italians can manage their emotions. In fact, Stephen Stosny, who wrote the Compassion Power curriculum, is Italian, right? His heritage is Italian. Oh, I love this one. Well, I'm Asian, or you might say he's Asian, or she's Asian, so they must be good at math. People go like, well, the Japanese, well, they do have a lot of math. American children where we maybe don't focus on that, but just because you're Asian doesn't necessarily mean you're good at math, right? Just like being a pasty white girl doesn't mean I'm bad at math, okay? So again, it takes something and it makes the story the reality. I'm female, so I should like shopping, or I'm a man, so I should hate shopping, okay? Third one, other people are blank, so I have to blank. So now this one often gets written in, boy, this just does not want to respond today. My husband might come and give me the 5-minute warning. So other people are blank, so I have to blank, or other people don't, so I can't. Now, this often comes from our history. So find examples in your life. So you might say, well, women or men are untrustworthy, so I just have to look out for me. And you might go, wow, I treat the men and women I meet as all untrustworthy because my story, which may have been influenced by my childhood, says people are untrustworthy. Is that going to get me where I want in relationships, right? So look for those personal narratives. Or, here's one, people don't give ex-felons a chance, so I can't have a legitimate job. Darla, you don't understand. When I get out, I've got to have an illegal job because no one will give ex-felons a chance. So I can't have a legit job. That can be turned into a whole story. And usually if we're in the group, it's funny, whenever anyone says that, someone in the group will say, that ain't true. I've gotten a job. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's not harder when you're, someone just coming out, but it can happen. So again, all these things we make up are things our stories tell us. Now, the fourth one, the last one, is not being a first-person narrator in your own story. What I mean by that is, in your story, you should be the one figuring out and speaking your truth. That means you don't get to go one down and be the role of the pathetic victim, but it also means you don't get to go one up and be, some grandiose person when you haven't earned it. He did this to me. She did that to me. They did this to me. And they never get beyond it. That's letting someone else control your story. And again, that doesn't say those things don't happen. Example I used recently because someone was talking about the race thing, but then I said, well, what about the female thing? And they said, what about the female thing? It's a women's state. Women have all the rights. And I'm like, in the 70s, the 1970s, which I certainly remember because I was born in 62, women could not get a credit card in their own name. Women were not allowed that, right? Now, I could have said, well, they don't let me have any maintenance. I can't do anything, or they've been, keeping women down for so long, so I can't do it. At some point, I have to say, yes, there might be disparities, and yes, things might not be fair. And what am I going to do with that reality and still make it work for my story? And that's often where some of the things of courage come from. I mean, that's Viktor Frankl, Edith Ava Agar coming out of concentration camps. They didn't control the reality, but they controlled how they dealt with reality. Instead, you can switch that around to this happened, there's what I did with this, and this is what I'm doing now. So I do want you to work on an assignment where you're starting to identify some of the themes, meanings, and identities that go along with your script. What are some of the behaviors that your script has made you do? So next time we're together, we can talk about how do you change that script. Are you stuck in a certain chapter and you need to get yourself out of that chapter? How are you going to get yourself out of that chapter? And then you might even start thinking, how could I rewrite my story? And with stories, it's often good to look at the past. Then the next part you often want to look at is what's the future in your story? And if I have certain dreams and goals and meanings for my future that I want, then you say, what do I need to be doing in the present to work with my past, to change things in the present so I create the future I want? So I'll be really interested to see if anyone picked up the challenge and started looking at what is your story when we come back together in person. Thanks.